Thank you all for being here. We'll go ahead and get started. My name is Ryan Maxson. I'm the Vice President of Government and Public Affairs here at the Greater San Diego Association of Realtors. The topic today is Prop 19, which is known as the Home Protections for Seniors, Severely Disabled Individuals, Families, and Victims of Wildfire and Natural Disaster. This passed in this most recent election by a vote of 51.1%, so eking it out. But again, certain provisions are coming into play at different times that we're going to be covering in depth. There are three key provisions in Prop 19. First and foremost, it expands property tax portability. We see this as a tremendous opportunity. Right now, under current law, Prop 60, you're allowed to transfer your property tax basis one time at the age of 55 or older. What Prop 19 did was expand that to 3 different times and allows you to transfer anywhere in the state. It at this time includes individuals 55 and older, those with severe disabilities, and victims of wildfire or natural disaster. This also allows a transfer of the portion of property tax to a property of greater value. Under current law, it's only to a property of essentially equal or lesser value. So again, great flexibility for our senior population. This also provides important grants and funds for the community and firefighting resources, billions of dollars allocated there. And finally, the third portion, it modifies a portion of the inheritance tax breaks. We get a lot of questions on this provision that our speaker, Jesse, is going to cover at length. And this provision comes into effect February 16th, important date for everyone on this call to remember. With that, I will go ahead and introduce our speaker, Jesse Lipscomb. He is the enrolled agent for Roadmap Tax Services. He specializes in tax planning for real estate agents and real estate investors. And he's the former radio host of Financial CPR Radio, The Moneymakers, and Business Network Radio. So you'll probably recognize his voice, if not his face, on the meeting today. And finally, he's a graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point. Very impressive, Jesse. And as always, thank you for being here today.
Here we go. Real quick about me. I'm an enrolled agent and an investment advisor. I specialize in tax planning for real estate agents and real estate investors. We're going to talk about the changes of what Prop 19 is and practical examples of how to implement the changes here. The best tool that I've seen is from the BOE, and that's at boa.ca.gov/Prop 19. They're comparison charts that talk about the changes from Prop 60, 90, and 110, which 60, 90 allowed you 55 plus to move your property base once. 110 is if you were disabled. And then also the parent-child, grandparent-grandchild exclusion, Props 58 and 193. And we're going to go here over those in a minute. A couple of things. The major changes with Prop 19 is if you are a homeowner, you now can either upsize or downsize and still move some or all of your property tax bases. You can also now do that 3 times, and you can do it anywhere in California, whereas previously there were only certain counties that reciprocated. That's tremendous. Key date to keep in mind is April 1st. April 1st is the date that Prop 19 for 55 plus is implemented. There's a lot of uncertainty and confusion of, what if I sold my house in January? Can I buy another house in April, and can I use Prop 19? That is still one of those areas that's up in the air. I think personally, unfortunately, it's in the best interest of the taxing agencies to say no, because if, let's say in January you sold your house and you moved it up in value, they'd rather reassess that new property than give you the ability to transfer it. But I think with so many questions about this, I think it may get some more clarity here as we get closer to April. Disaster relief is pretty interesting. Prop 19 also allows, even if you're not 55, if you are in a disaster area and you need to sell on account of that, to possibly transfer your property tax base. Now, the grandparent grandchild exclusion This is probably the biggest change that you need to be aware of. Previously, your principal residence could be transferred to your children regardless of the value and regardless of the use. So what I mean by that is it's your principal residence. They could inherit it. It didn't have to be their principal residence. Now it has to be their primary residence and the person that receives it. Plus, there's a cap of $1 million of gains on top of what's assessed. Anything over that gets reassessed. Previously, also, you could transfer up to $1 million of assessed rental properties without being reassessed, but that's been eliminated. One of the big things, or two big things to know about this, is that this is effective February 16th, which means, there's less than 2 weeks for people to take action. And we're going to talk about whether that makes sense or not here in a minute. Defining terms, really, really important. Prop 13 in California reassesses the property taxes when you buy a property, but then it keeps them low, capped at 2%. So you'll find that people that bought their homes in the 70s, they'll have a very low purchase price, a very high current market value, but a very low assessed tax base. So we need to explore that to make sure we know how that applies. Plus, understand that the assessed value generally will be capped by that Prop 13 unless you do something to dramatically improve the property. Like in 2014, our house burned down. We rebuilt it and added square footage. When we added the square footage, it actually got reassessed. And then market value, when you buy or sell a property, and now with Prop 19, if you pass away, it may be reassessed. So the assessed value, market value, and we'll dive into that more in a minute. Some online tools you can use. SDTTC.com is a great website. It's the county tax collector's site. It'll show you your tax rate and what your property is being assessed at. Realtor.com, great website. It's going to, again, give the assessed value, show your prior year taxes, and give an estimate of the market value. Of course, as real estate agents, you guys have the best way to evaluate the market value of it. It's a good tool. A little quiz here. If we're going to look up this property, Antigua Boulevard, 5596, let's find the answers to these tools. And I see a question here. Jared asks about the video from yesterday. I'm going to kind of push that to the end. I know that this website or this webinar is being recorded. I'm not sure if we're going to push out yesterday or today, but we should know here by the end of the webinar. And Ray asks, is the 2% one-timer every year? That's a great question. Let me show this example, and we'll be able to evaluate that. But it's capped at 2% annually. So here, we're just at the county website. We're going to type in the address, take a look at it. California tax rate's 1%, and then locally we have a bunch of bonds. That's why the actual tax rate's 122 for this home. $971 a year, $72 a year. Property is land and improvements, $76,000. And now if you go to realtor.com and you pull up the price and tax history, you're going to see that the house was bought for $32,000 in 1972. Currently, again, assessed $76,000, and the current market value is $771,000. Going to Ria's question is, how are the properties assessed taxes annually? Well, you can see every year it's going up a little bit, about 2%. Okay, but the current market value is tenfold what it's being assessed. So that would be your market value, and that's your current value, or the assessed value. and the purchase price. Okay. So as we go through, we want to know the answers to the question. House was bought for $32,000. It's currently being assessed at $76,000, and we're estimating the market value at $771,000. Okay. So if we look at practical examples of what happens with Prop 19, well, you can sell your house as a homeowner, and you can either upsize or downsize. Okay. Again, reviewing the differences between Prop 60 and 90 and 19, you can now do this 3 times. And you can either go 100% or less, or any value, which just means lower or higher, and then anywhere in California. And this is effective April 1st. So again, given our sample, let's see what happens if you downsize. Current value $771, buying a $750,000 home. Okay, Prop 13, here are your numbers. Okay, with Prop 19 right now, downsizing is just like Prop 60. You're not going to be reassessed taxes on $750,000. You're going to keep your same low assessed value. It's going to save you $8,200 a year. Pretty awesome. Let's say you go up in value. Let's say you go up to a $1.2 million home, which is a $500,000 upside. Well, if we didn't pass Prop 19, they'd be looking at $15,000 a year of taxes, as opposed to $7,000 of taxes. Now, why $7,000? Because you were previously paying taxes based on $76,000 assessed, and you went up in value $500,000. Well, that gain's going to be reassessed. So now you're going to pay taxes on $576,000. So you're going to pay $7,000 a year. But the Prop 19 still saves you $8,500 a year in taxes. That's pretty cool. And you can do it up to 3 times. Just for those really love math out there, here's how we came to that. Market value versus sales price, $500,000 increase. Add that to the assessed value. That's what gets reassessed. And that's how you calculate your savings. So put together an Excel calculator for you all. As a former soldier, I like to joke, I marine-proof this, and all that means is I made it yellow. If it's in yellow, you can change the information. If it's not yellow, you can't. And anybody on the call today we're happy to give a copy of this Excel file as well as a copy of the presentation. Regarding inherited transfers and gifts, this is, so far, we've talked about Prop 19 as it applies to homeowners 55 years and older, okay? Pretty easy. You can either downsize just like before or upsize and still keep a lot of the benefits of Prop 13. When it comes to inheriting properties, parent-child, grandparent-grandchild exclusions, this is really where we've got to become wise to it. Now, Terry Green asks, these apply only for homeowners 55 years plus. And I'm going to say what we've just been talking about, yes, and if you're disabled and if you're a wildfire victim, okay? It's pretty interesting. Not that it's impossible, but I've thought about this. Why? Because 2014, we had a house fire, and our house literally was burned down to the ground. We rebuilt it, but the likelihood of losing your house in a fire and moving to a different area, it's actually very slim. And the reason it's very slim is that insurance is going to pay you either the replacement value, which is high, or the actual cash value, which is very low. Why? Because your house just burned down. you got a pile of rubble. It's probably not worth as much as if it was rebuilt. And so I think there may be an opportunity for people that live in wildfire areas potentially to use Prop 19 as a way to sell and transfer the property tax bases without without either being 55 or losing their house in a fire. But I think it's just something to stay alert to. And so Joe, or Jose rather, he's leading us back to the conversation here with the parent-child, grandparent-child exclusion. Let's talk about that. He says, if the owners pass away, don't their heirs keep the same basis, or is it reassessed? That's awesome. Those are actually two very separate questions. And I'm going to be able to answer it better here momentarily, but I want you to understand your basis. Your basis is what you buy a house for. When you pass away, your children will get a step up in basis to current market. This is a capital gains tax situation. When it comes to property taxes and property tax assessments, this is the meat and potatoes of Prop 19 as it applies to inheritances. Previously, if it's your primary residence and you pass away, your kids inherit the property. They keep the same low tax basis. From a capital gain standpoint, they receive the step up in basis, all is good. Now, in order for them to keep the low tax basis on the family home, they have to live in the property also. Plus, if the current value is over $1 million more than the assessed value, it will also be adjusted. And I'll show you the math on that here in a minute. But that is no longer true of rental properties. So let's kind of continue here. Again, I'm going to jump back to the inherited section. So here's our sample property, just like before. Okay, it's the primary residence of the owner. Current market, just like before, 771. Assessed value 76,000. Less than a $700,000 difference. Less than $1 million difference. That means whether it's before Prop 19 or after, if the person that inherits the property claims this as their primary residence, you'll maintain the same low tax basis just as before. And by the way, you've got a year to claim that. See that? File for a homeowner's exemption within a year. So that means, grandma, grandpa die, you inherit the property, you've got a year to claim Prop 19 and claim it as your principal residence. Okay, so that's pretty easy. Scenario 2, the market value continues to rise, and instead of being 771, it's now $1.1 million. $1.1 million rather over the old assessed value. So in that situation, previously there was no limit, but now there's a $1 million limit on top of the assessed value. So in this situation, $1 million would be protected, but you'd now be reassessed at $176,000 as opposed to $76,000. Not a huge difference, honestly. I mean, you go from $900 a year to $2,000 a year. It's $1,200 bucks. I mean, it's $100 a month difference. No big deal. But now for the rental, this is where the potential planning opportunities exist. As a rental property, you got that $1 million difference. It actually doesn't matter because rental properties don't get they don't get any benefits with Prop 19. They're just reassessed. And I'm scrolling back up because I want to show you this. Okay, that's your homeowners. Here is the inherited property. Okay, principal residence needs to be the principal residence of the person receiving it as well, with $1 million cap on the assessed value. If it's an inheritance, there's no exclusion for keeping the property from being reassessed. So let's talk about some pre-planning for February 16th. And I said this yesterday, and I believe this. I ought to make this in big red letters, underlined and with exclamation marks, because I understand you don't want to get the rental property reassessed when you transfer it, but there are a lot of other evils out there that you have to be careful of. I mean, The step up in basis of capital gains is one of the most powerful tax tools that we have. You bought the house at $32,000. It's worth $1 million when you pass away. Your kids inherited it $1 million. Should they sell it right then and there, they're going to get $1 million completely free of taxes. Now, obviously, they sell the property, but the other parts of it are also, well, if you transfer your property to your kids right now before you die, you're going to have to file a gift tax return on it, which is no big deal. If you've got less than $1 million estate, you're not going to have to pay taxes on that. But when you transfer it to your child, guess what? They now own it for what you bought it for. So if you bought it for $32,000, they own it for $32,000. They don't get the step up in basis when you die. So it's kind of interesting balance between, would you rather receive something as an inheritance completely tax-free, or would you rather have the tax liability on it but lower property taxes? And plus, the other part of it is, if you transfer your investment property to your kids, unfortunately, you may ultimately be making a future ex-son or daughter-in-law an owner of that investment property. So you just got to be careful. And Lena asks a great question. What if the property is inherited by multiple siblings? So the couple of different answers to that question, okay? It depends on how the siblings take title. So if the residence is the primary residence of mom and dad and they pass away and they give it 50-50 to their son and their daughter, if the son lives there, his portion won't be reassessed. But if the daughter doesn't live there, then her portion will be reassessed. So that's something to think about. Now, let's go into, again, some potential transfer strategies. And again, be aware of the unintended consequences. I've talked to a lot of people about Prop 19, and I've actually only seen one scenario where it made any sense. And this one scenario was the adult child was already managing all the rental properties of his parents. Should mom and dad pass away, he would continue managing the properties. He understood the ins and outs of property management, and he was going to be fine. He wasn't in a situation where he was going to go out and sell the properties. In that situation, a gift to him, keeping the property tax basis for property taxes low, was fine. He wasn't married. He wasn't worried about potential liability or divorce, and he wasn't going to sell them. Plus, he knew if he did sell them, he could always 1031 exchange and continue the gains. But I just want people to think about what's the most likely thing that's going to happen. If somebody inherits an investment property, the most likely scenario is they're going to sell it. And at that point, it's better not to pay any capital gains than potentially not to have to pay property taxes. So a life estate is probably the best strategy that people don't even know about anymore. A life estate allows you to maintain control of the asset. You transfer it to somebody else, but for the rest of your life, you're able to enjoy the income and the use of the property. Now, you need an attorney to set up a life estate, but that is a way to keep the property from being reassessed. Same thing if you sold the property to your kids and did a seller finance on it, you could do that. This last bullet point's kind of silly. I mean, this is just trying to find some solution, right? If you sold your primary residence and you locked in that $500,000 gain, and then you moved into your rental and you made that your primary, and you transferred your property Prop 60 tax base all by February 15th, maybe then your kids inherit that property. But as a primary. I don't really think that that's feasible or plausible. Terry says, if an inheritor makes the property their primary residence, but at some point in the future they decide to rent out the property, will that cause the property to be reassessed? Is there some kind of time limit? Great question, Terry. So yes and no. Yes, you can inherit the property as your primary residence and live there, and sometime in the future turn it into a rental property without it being reassessed. It's only event driven. So way early in the presentation here, I talk about the difference between assessed value and market value, and the event in this case is not whether or not you turn it in from a primary to a rental, but rather the change of title upon the passing of the original owner. So, you know, I don't view this as kind of like a scheme. You know what I mean? You're going to inherit the property. You're going to use it as your primary residence. And then if your situation's changed and you turn it into a rental, no big deal. You know, I haven't heard of any time frames as to how long that could be. Generally speaking, if we're talking 1031 exchanges, it's usually a rule of thumb to do 2 years. So if you do a 1031 from one rental to another, after 2 years, if you turn that into a primary residence, that's usually okay. I would think that would be a good rule of thumb with this as well. Where can we get more information on a life estate? Actually, NOLO has a good piece on that. But again, you would need to talk to an estate attorney to do that. I will, Laura, if you give me a minute, I'll look up an article that I can share with you, and I can share with anybody here on the call as well. Let's see. So as a recap here, we've talked about the changes of Prop 19, and we've gone over some practical examples. I think that the big thing to be aware of with Prop 19 as it applies to homeowners is the April 1st deadline, or not. It's not even a deadline. It's like a launch date. The fact of the matter is, I know a lot of people have bought and sold homes since November when this was voted on, and right now. And I hate to say it, but they're all just kind of in limbo. They're neither good nor bad. They just don't know. And unfortunately, the BOE doesn't even know. But hopefully that gets cleared out as we get closer to April 1st. The 100% for sure is if you buy and sell after April 1st, Prop 19 will apply. Parent-child, grandparent-grandchild exclusion, you only have until February 15th to transfer the title to maintain the old reassessment laws. Anybody on the call? I'm happy to give you copies of these Excel calculators, just designed to help you evaluate your situation. Are there any other questions that we can help you answer? Oh, here it is. So Robert Han asks a good question. So Robert wants to sell a condo, which he inherited in inheritance. Okay, under Prop 13, very cool. It's been a rental for 2 years. Okay, market value. Oh, okay. So Robert has a great scenario, but there's some things with this that don't strictly apply. So I'm actually going to bring in paint because I found that sometimes it's easier to draw this out. So he's got a condo that he inherited 4 years ago. Okay, so inherited the property, and actually he inherited it under Prop 58, which is the parent-child exclusion, which keeps the property taxes low. Okay, that's actually one of the propositions that Prop 19 is changing, actually. But then he took this property and made it into a rental. Now, when you have a rental property, you can't, it doesn't matter if it's pre-Prop 19 or after Prop 19, as a rental property, it does not qualify for either Prop 60, which is the old transfer of basis when you're 55, or Prop 19. Okay? It would qualify from a capital gains standpoint for a 1031 exchange, but if the goal, so he just turned 55, and the goal is to sell the condo and try to use that tax base and buy a new house in a better school district. Okay, so here's what you do. Now, and there will be some potential frustrating taxes on this, but not very horrible. Here's what you do. You're going to take that rental and you're going to live there as a primary residence. Okay? You move in at least 1 year, but I'm going to say 2 years recommended. Why? Because if it's your primary residence, then you can use Prop 19 to transfer to transfer that property tax base to a new primary residence. But it has to be as a primary residence. Okay, so if you're going to do that, you can use Prop 19. That's 55 plus. Okay, it's got to be your primary residence, and there's two scenarios. There's upsizing and downsize. Wait a minute, upsize, downsize. Okay, I think this is an example. Just kind of listening to this, market value 600,000. They're trying to get into a better school district, right? So probably going to be in a situation where he's using Prop 19 to upsize the property, in which case anything over that $600,000 market value will be reassessed, but it will help them. The goal here is to sell the condo and try to use that tax base and buy a new house in a better school district. Okay. Now, there is something that they would need to do concurrent with this, and that is they're going to have to sell their current residence under Section 121, and you all know Section 121 as the 2 of 5 year exclusion, okay, where you can get up to $500,000 of capital gains taxes forgiven, basically. But also with that, you've got a couple of things here. So they sell their current, and then they move in to the inherited property for 2 years. And whereas earlier I said 2 years recommended, now I'm going to say it's 2 years mandatory. Why? Because when you do a Section 121 2 of 5 year exclusion, you can only claim this every 2 years. So if you sell the condo, you need to live in this inherited property for 2 years so that when you sell it, you can use Section 121 again to keep your capital gains low. Now, there is one little bit of frustration here as well, Robert, that you need to be aware of, and it's this. If you guys, and you shouldn't be giving tax advice to your clients, but you should be aware of IRS Publication 523, because it's literally called selling your home. And on page 15, it's going to talk about something called non-qualified use. And with that, if you can see here, it's going to say the total number of days after 2008 when the property wasn't your primary residence, and then the total number of days that you own the home. The problem here is when he was renting this property out, those years, so he inherited the property 4 years ago and rented it 2 years. So right now, 50% of the time that he's owned the property would not be subject to the capital gains exclusion under section 121. And I know we're getting into the weeds here a little bit, but if you can think of it this way, if he inherited the property, we're going to say at $400,000, and it's now worth $600,000. Okay, there's a $200,000 capital gain there. Okay, he inherited the property 4 years ago, but for 2 of those 4 years, it was a rental. And if he moves into it for another 2 years, okay, he'll own the property for a total of 8 years, or excuse me, a total of 6 years, of which 2 was a rental. So 1/3 of the gain wouldn't be eligible for exclusion. So in this situation, that might be $60,000 that he'd potentially pay capital gains taxes on, even though he's selling a primary residence. So you can see this kind of gets a little complicated as we go through it. Now, talking about title to make this property better for our son when he inherits it in a trust or another. Well, if you have it in a trust, that will bypass probate. But the only way so when your son inherits the property, the step up of basis, capital gains, that should be pretty straightforward, unless you transfer title to him. Regarding Prop 19, in order to keep the property taxes low in this, he's going to need to inherit this as a primary residence. And Jose, absolutely. Best way to get a hold of me, roadmaptax.com, just under our contact tab. I'm physically right here in Mission Valley, and our phone number, emails right there. And Laura asked a good question. You know, what if you split your time between 2 residents as your primary residence? Boy, that becomes tricky. And it's one of those things where one of those 2 residences you're going to spend more time at, and nobody lives exactly 6 months and 6 months. So to that end, you know, from a super practical standpoint, it's just going to be, you know, what do you report in your taxes as your primary residence, and you kind of go with it. And I'm assuming this question has to do with Section 121. The portion of Section 121 where we have to worry about non-qualified use is in large part as it applies to when you have that property rented out. So sorry to go in the weeds here a little bit, but I hope you guys that answered those questions. Let's see. All right. Thanks everybody for attending. Are there any other questions out there? Oh, David. David says a house is being parent-child transferred before February 15th. Okay. The transferee will live in that house as a primary. Okay. How long would it be until the transferee could do another parent-child transfer for the house to their own child as a primary residence? Uh-oh. We're bringing up paint again, David. All right. A house is being parent-child transferred. That means that they're going to transfer the title of the property from the parent to child in advance of Prop 19. Okay. Perfect. That's easy. So title's been transferred. Okay. Then parent is going to live in the house, okay, as a primary residence. But, and this is where it kind of gets tricky, you've got the child now as the owner because it was transferred, right? And you got the parent. I'm not going to call, I mean, I am going to put tenant, but I mean, they're not really a tenant, but you know what I mean? They're maybe a guest. They're a non-owner occupant of the property now. Okay. This is basically the concepts of a life estate, by the way. And it says, how long would it be until the transferee, the parent, could do another transfer, parent-child transfer, for the house to be their own child as a primary residence? I apologize, David. I don't understand the question, because it immediately becomes the property of the child. The parent continues to live there. If you're asking how long does it have to be the property of the child to sell it as a child's primary residence, well, at least 2 years from 2 years of ownership. So how long would it be for that child to be able to do a transfer for their own child? Oh, that's interesting. Thanks for the clarification on that. I don't think that this has a time frame on it. Here's what I mean. If we go back to the presentation, the slide here, okay, with the parent-child exclusion, mom and dad just transferred the property to their adult child, and they continue to live there. Okay. Now, if this recipient now wants to transfer the property to their child, which would technically be a grandchild to the parent, right? Then, which is the child's child, right? I don't think that there's any time frame except for you're still fighting the February 15th clock. Okay, so in other words, they do this transfer under Prop 58, parent to child, and they do this on February 1st. And on February 10th, this child transfers the property to their child. That's still February. That's still Prop 58 stuff. Okay. Oops. Okay, that's still Prop 58. So I don't think there's any like time frame other than like from a negative, you've got to beat the clock there.
Need more help? Contact SDAR Member Services at 858-715-8040 or membership@sdar.com.